Hello, my name is Jacob Pauna, and the title of this project is How Viable is Habitat Restoration in the Great Plains? Now, the place to start is with my research question, which is how viable is large-scale habitat restoration in the Great Plains, and what are the factors that affect optimality? Now, to answer this question, we'll first look at Great Plains history, such as how people have viewed the plains, how the plains have been treated, and what people think of the plains now, which leads to the idea of the Buffalo Commons, which I'll further explain in this presentation. Then from there, I will look at Great Plains restoration and preservation, and then perform a GIS analysis on the optimality of it. The place to start is to look at how people have viewed the plains over time. In 1890, the U.S. Census said, in reference to the frontier, that the frontier line had disappeared, and that the settled area had become the rule and the unoccupied places the exception. Now, spurred by this 1890 census results, Frederick Jackson Turner famously declared the American frontier closed in 1893. But the census never really proclaimed the frontier closed, Turner did. And according to this study, in the 1990s, most of the nation's late 19th century frontier remained intact. As you can see in this GIF right here, the population slowly grows in the west, but then slowly tapers off, and the frontier line appears to move back east. The census used three types of land classification when Turner declared the frontier closed, and these were wilderness or vacant land, that is unsettled land with less than 2 people per square mile, frontier settlement with between 2 and 6 people per square mile, and fully settled places with 6 or more people per square mile. This map here displays these categories using 2010 block county data. As you can see, the West has a lot of wilderness and frontier land intact even in 2010. Since people have inhabited the Great Plains, they have molded it and shaped it for their needs. Due to this, there are a number of human-caused environmental impacts on the plains, and these include habitat destruction and fragmentation, biodiversity being harmed, such as the bison or tallgrass prairie, and impacts caused by agriculture, such as soil erosion and pesticides. These are just some of the impacts caused over the years. Because so much damage has been done, there are many groups who seek to restore portions of the Great Plains to their former glory. According to this article by David Carl, the idea of protecting large areas of the plains is not a new idea. It has been debated for more than 160 years. Now, the importance of protecting the Great Plains area shouldn't be understated, because the region has a unique ecology. He says, for change to take place, the creation, restoration, and preservation of the Great Plains must be made into a national and not just a local issue, and that the debate needs to move to the next step. A campaign that has clearly defined plans should be developed. In fact, some proposed nature reserves have already been created, such as the Tallgrass Prairie National Reserve. Now, the most famous plan for restoring the Great Plains was proposed by Frank and Deborah Popper in 1987. Their idea was known as the Buffalo Commons. They believed that over the next generation, the plains will, as a result of the largest, longest-running agricultural and environmental miscalculation in American history, become almost totally depopulated, and at that point, a new use for the region will emerge. They suggested that the plains be returned to their pre-white conditions, and that the U.S. government treat the area as a distinct region and recognize its unsuitability for agriculture. The Poppers proposed that the government buy out failing agricultural areas and turn them into a huge nature reserve, known as the Buffalo Commons. They said to take down the fences, replant the shortgrass, and restock the animals, including the buffalo. This really started a dialogue and has caused years of debate about the proper course to be taken in the Great Plains. Now, people tend to focus on the American bison when they talk about the Buffalo Commons idea. According to this article by Curtis H. Freese and colleagues, perhaps no species is as emblematic of the Great Plains of North America as the American bison. After almost going extinct due to overhunting and forage competition, the American bison was brought back from the brink by conservationists. If a large nature reserve were created in the plains, the bison could possibly return from being ecologically extinct and once again become ecosystem engineers. But, because of the term Buffalo Commons' negative connotation, discussions about restoring bison are often tainted. After the Poppers released their initial Buffalo Commons article, many experts sought to discredit the Poppers' ideas. One such article that did so pointed out three big flaws in the Poppers' reasoning, and these were perceptual assumptions, methodological problems, and a failure to recognize and articulate the proposal's implications for Great Plains residents. Overall, the Popper's analysis of the area wasn't in-depth enough and missed many contributing factors in the area. I will try to mend this in my GIS analysis of restoration in the Great Plains. Still, the idea of restoring portions of the Great Plains has only become more frequently brought up over the years. And according to this article by Daniel S. Leaked, if we are serious about conserving naturally functioning ecosystems in the Great Plains, and we should be, then we need to consider radical changes in our conservation strategies. When creating a new nature reserve, the government should work with the farmers, aka the current residents. This was one of the biggest criticisms of the Popper's initial approach, and possibly consider a new way to deal with failing farms. In selecting sites for conservation, it is important to consult with experts, but it is also important to analyze the subject on your own. In this article, the author did his own analysis of ecoreserves in the Great Plains. His major criteria were ecological value, amount of public land present, potential to reduce farm surpluses, social impact, and potential for tourism. This kind of analysis is the basis for the GIS analysis used in this project. There are various benefits that could be gained by having large-scale ecological restoration in the Great Plains. Now these include, but are not limited to, preserving ecosystems, expand and connect currently protected lands, restore former keystone species to the environment, such as the bison. In fact, there's already an increased market for bison meat in the Great Plains. Tourism, ecosystem services, help maintain the water supply, and put subpar farmland to use and allow the land to heal from years of overuse. Once again, the research question for this project is, how viable is large-scale habitat restoration in the Great Plains, and what are the factors that affect optimality? Now to accomplish this, I will take a similar approach to the leaked article. So first, I'll choose various variables that indicate optimality, which are in this diagram here in the green, and I do this to avoid making the same mistakes as the Poppers. The use of multiple variables creates a more well-rounded picture. Then, I will use GIS to determine where these viable lands are located. This will be done by combining them into two final maps. This is the model that I used for this project. By examining each of the model's components, it'll be way easier to understand how the variables were utilized. The first variable that I used was the agricultural census. From the agricultural census, I chose 5 variabilities that I felt indicated how viable a land was by county. And these were net cash farm income, total received from government, market value of farm, average size of farm in acres, and value per acre. If the government were to deprivatize some farms for the sake of restoration areas, an ideal site would be very large but with low value per acre. So each county was ranked based on these variables, and the optimal counties are indicated in white. The next variable was isolation. So I made this map by using the Euclidean distance tool on institutions, businesses, and malls within the Great Plains. And then, by using raster calculator, I combined them. The resulting map shows isolation from these amenities. Isolation is indicated in the white, and these would be the ideal lands. The next variable I used was protected lands, but I focused on GAP 1 and 2 lands, which are protected lands that are fully protected and not open for extraction. So this map was created by using the Euclidean distance tool on these protected lands, and the resulting map shows proximity to these areas. When restoring Great Plains areas, expanding upon existing protected areas may prove a more viable option. The next variable that I used was called the ragamuffin earth layer, and this indicated proximity to paved lands in row crop agriculture. The initial raster for this only had a yes or no rating based on the land type. So by using the focal statistics tool, it gives the resulting raster more variability. Proximity to the unpaved areas is highly desirable in creating a nature reserve, and this is indicated in white in the map. The final variable that I used was this friction of distance raster. Now this was created using all the roads in the Great Plains. So in the map, the whiter looking roads would be like major highways, while the darker looking roads would be just normal streets and dirt roads. So the ideal areas would be those in black, indicating less roads. When creating a nature reserve, distance from these is ideal. And lastly, by using block group level population data, fully settled lands, as in 6 people per square mile or above, the scale used by the 1890 census, were excluded from the results. This leaves only lands with the classification of wilderness or prairie. Based on the various factors that indicate suitability used for this project, I created two final maps showing potential land viability in the Great Plains. Now, the first map just assigns a yes or no rating to lands for optimality, and the second map just displays land optimality from strongest to weakest. Both of these maps were created from the reclassified rasters of all the previous maps. This first map just gives a yes or no rating to portions of land within the Great Plains, based on whether or not they would be eligible for protection and restoration. This eligibility was determined by entering a conditional statement within Raster Calculator, and thus, if each condition was met for each of the variable rasters, land would be given a yes rating. This really narrows it down, and these lands are indicated in the red, indicating that they satisfied every single one of the conditions that I entered in. This last map is just another combination of all the previous variable maps. It was created by using Raster Calculator and adding each of the variables together. Each raster was assigned a weight depending on its perceived importance, so that it would have more or less of an effect on the final map's look. The most optimal areas are in red, while the weaker ones are in blue. In conclusion, according to this project's optimality criteria, areas in Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, and New Mexico may be the most suitable lands for restoration. Thankfully, restoration and preservation are already underway by a number of organizations, so it looks like analysis of land viability definitely has a positive effect. Some examples of these organizations are the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, the American Prairie Reserve, and the Dakota Tallgrass Prairie Reserve. And in the final maps, some of the most optimal areas were actually centered around currently protected lands, so it does appear that expanding upon currently protected lands may be the best course of action for the future. And lastly, I have some suggestions for future research and policy. I feel that continued analysis of land viability is important, especially in consultation with experts. For further analysis, more variables could possibly be added, such as population growth and type of land, or on-the-ground analysis could be implemented. Also, research on how to connect existing reserves is very important, since that might be the most optimal way for getting protected lands moving forward. And for future policy, I suggest updating or creating policy on deprivatizing failing farmlands and economic incentives for plains restoration and preservation. This is the data that I used during this project.